All right, so this morning we have again, as we have in the past, there's no reason to even list his credentials. We all know him so well. We know how inspiring he is and what a great speaker he is. And rumor has it he tells jokes too. So let's all welcome now Reverend Joel. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I thought there was a song before me.
No.
After, okay. Got it,
After.
Ty. Thanks. All right, well, we'll just jump right in.
Unless you'd want to sing one.
You really don't want that to happen. That's worse than the joke. That's the one thing worse than this joke today. This joke is inspired by my computer skills, which are non-existent. Anybody else with me? Just non-existent computer skills. This joke is for us. So Becky, I don't think we have any Beckys, so this is not anybody that we know. Becky was having trouble with her computer. And actually, hang on, I've got this. She was having trouble with her computer. So she called her son to come over and help. And he spent 2 hours trying to teach his mother, Becky, how to use the computer. So after those 2 hours, Becky was sure that she knew everything there was to know about computers. Unfortunately, the very next day, she just couldn't get the computer to start correctly. And she called her son, but her son was busy. So she called one of those IT tech guys to come over and take a look at it. So the IT tech guy came over and he tinkered around with her computer for a little while, and he managed to fix her computer within minutes. And then he called his boss, and Becky overheard the IT guy on the phone calling his boss to tell him about what had just happened, the issue that had just happened. And she heard him tell his boss that he had just fixed an ID10T issue on the computer and was now going to go back to the office. Well, that sounded really serious to Becky. And when he got off the phone, Becky tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, if you don't mind me asking, gosh, that sounded like a really serious issue. What did you call it again?" And he said, "Well, it's an ID10T issue." And she says, "Wow, well, it sounds like a serious problem. Here, can you write this on a piece of paper so I can tell my son what it is?" And the man smiled, and he took out a pen, and he said, "Yes, this is the ID10T problem." All right, it's a slow sinker. It's slow. Oh, you know, it's October. Okay, so that's today's talk. Today's joke. Maybe it's today's talk too. Actually, the name of the talk today is Chop Wood, Carry Water. And when I was trying to think about what to talk about today, boy, I was just really inspired by what was going on in the world. I'm not sure if anybody else is aware of this, but there's actually an election happening. Anybody else aware of the election, right? Yeah. And in addition to this election, which seems to be all-consuming all the time, you know, whether you watch television, you go to your computer news, you do any social media or talk to any of your friends, that's what people seem to be talking about. And in addition to that, there's just so many changes going on in my life and in people's lives and in the world. And so, you know, I was reminded actually of an Instagram post that I posted 4 years ago, just after the election in 2016, when Trump became president. And a lot of us were trying, whether both sides were trying to figure out how did this happen and what was going on, and we were just trying to find a way to hold all this. And I was trying to take it all in, and I was trying to be on my spiritual path right after that election. And so this is the Instagram post that I wrote. It says, before the election, chop wood, carry water. After the election, chop wood, carry water. And for me, that was really important because it reminded me of the fact that my life might be impacted, but did not, my day-to-day life was not about the election. My day-to-day life was about something larger than that. And so that's all, of course, present once again in our lives. And so I thought I would just talk about where I'm at. And I figured that by talking about where I'm at, it might have something that would be helpful to you. And how do I know that? Because I'm here and you're here by divine appointment. And so there's going to be something in this talk for you. And this talk is really about the things that I am currently meditating on in my spiritual practice. So this is really exactly where I'm at, the things that I'm really spending time with in my spiritual practice and my journaling, and just a few concepts that are really helping me as I and we walk through this time in our history, our personal history, and our collective history. Now, the first concept that I'll mention is a concept that actually came, not my first experience, but the first experience that I can remember really thinking about this was way back when I was taking practitioner classes. This is back in the late 80s or early 90s, something like that, a long time ago. That is the 1880s or 1890s. And anyway, it was a long time ago. And the practitioner teacher that we had, Dr. Patty Lukenbach, who's just amazing and still at Mile High Church in Denver, Colorado, she had us do an exercise with each other. And she had us get into twos, and I sat down in front of my partner, a woman named Esther, and she said, what you need to do is you need to ask each other the same question over and over. So the person A asks the question, then person B answers it. Then person B asks person A the question, person A answers it, and you go back and forth, but you ask the same question over and over. And the question is, who am I? All right, that's not so hard. So I said to Esther, who are you? And Esther said, I'm a mother. Who are you? And I said, well, this was years ago, so I said, I'm a son. Who are you? And we went back and forth. And at first it seemed kind of easy because, we have lots of different roles we play. I was this, and this, and she was this, and this. And then we kind of started to run out of things. And then it was like, oh, wait a second. We're in practitioner class. We should be all spiritual about this. So then it was like, who are you? I'm a child of God. Okay, who are you? I am a divine manifestation of the one mind. Who are you? I am and we went, and then after a few times of that, it was like, gosh, how many times can we say this? And then it was just like, wow, who am I? Once we got past the things that our roles are, and then the things that we think we should be, who am I? And so in my spiritual reading, this is one of the books that I'm reading in my spiritual reading right now. It's right there, Rob Bell, Everything is Spiritual. If you've not read this book, oh my gosh. If you liked The Power of Now, A New Earth, Untethered Soul, The Four Agreements, I mean, this is that kind of book. This is unbelievable. And in this book, he says this. He says, this is my version, him talking, of an old story. A woman goes on a quest to answer the one most important question, who am I? She sets out from her village and she hikes up the nearest mountain because she's heard there's a wise yogi living up there in a cage. She hikes for a day and comes to the yogi's cage. She enters, she bows, and sits down and asks the yogi, I'm on a quest to find the answer to the question, who am I? Well, the yogi shakes her head and replies, that is far too profound a question for someone like me. I can't help you. So the woman keeps hiking, going further and further up the mountain. Days later, she reaches another cave, entering to find an old saint hunched over a fire. She sits down and asks the saint, can you help me? Who am I? The saint smiles. Oh, she says, that is beyond me. The woman leaves and keeps going higher and higher up the mountain until she is above the tree line, and it's cold and windy. And after several days, she arrives at another cave where she finds an old woman alone on a rug. She sits down her stuff and she asks, who am I? The old woman looks her up and down, then arches her eyebrow and smiles and says, who's asking? So in that exercise with my practitioner teacher, when we all kind of got to that place where we had gone through everything we thought of about who we thought we were and who we thought we should be, somebody raised their hand and said, what is this supposed to teach us? How does this teach us who we are? And a practitioner teacher looked at us and she said, actually, this exercise does not teach you who you are. It teaches you whose you are. And that's the first point, and that's the point I think I always go back to when I'm on my spiritual practice, coming up against anything, bumping up against anything, is to remember whose I am, who I truly am. I don't have to try to fill a role, and I don't have to try to be a perfect spiritual this or that. I just have to remember who I am, which is I am the I am, who lives in me and breathes in me as me. And I don't have to do anything extra to just be that. I just am that automatically. And that grounds me in a way that almost nothing else can. Now, the second thing that I've been thinking about during this time in my spiritual practice also comes from this book, Everything is Spiritual by Rob Bell. And it's about the idea of embracing change. I don't know if you are experiencing it, but like I said, I'm having so much change in my life, and there seems to be so much change happening. Here's a question. Have you ever resisted change? Or here's an even better question. Have you ever stayed too long in anything? Good reactions. Well, listen to what Rob says, because he puts it beautifully. He says it so well in the book. He's talking about change, and that change has endings and has beginnings. And this is, I'm picking it up in the middle of a conversation he's having in the book. And he says, endings are often bad or painful, awkward, ugly. Endings can also be good. Have you ever stayed too long somewhere? Stayed too long in a job or a relationship or a place? Now get this, this is the best line. He says, when we stay too long, what could have been a graduation can easily become a divorce. What could have been a graduation can easily become a divorce. There was a window when it was time to leave, and he's talking about an experience he has when he felt like it was time to actually leave the church that he led. But we stayed. We stayed because it's comfortable or familiar or easy or a guaranteed paycheck. Or we were scared of what people would say if we left. And if we stay past that window, often things sour. They turn in on themselves. it gets toxic and we lose our joy. Not all endings are bad. Some are good and necessary. Nothing is wrong. It's just time to go. It's just time for change. For exactly that reason, because it's good. This can be a foreign idea if your endings have ever only been bad. Sometimes you have to leave because it's good. We have changes happening in our lives all the time. I think one of the main things that people have seen me about when I met with people as a minister, or even actually in my corporate job as well, where I was a minister undercover in the corporation. I think one of the things they come to see me most about is that they've stayed too long at something. So they'll sit down and they'll start telling me a story, and I've been that person too, by the way, a story about how their job is so terrible and their boss is so toxic and their this is so bad and their that is so bad. Or they'll tell me about a relationship that they're in. Their spouse is so this and the spouse did that to them, and they're stuck in this story. And I have said to people in the past, and I've said it to myself in my journal, when was the right time to have left? When was the right time to see that the change was happening and I stayed too long? And that's an interesting question, because then it takes everything off what's happening up there and it puts it right back into us and in our power. The choice that we have as change occurs in our lives is that we can either resist it, we can either stay too long in something that does no longer serve us, or we can ride the change like riding a surf, a wave. We can ride it into our next greater expression. So whose you are, embracing change. And the next thing is this. This actually comes from my book. I just want to tell you, I mentioned this last time I spoke. I had an interesting experience with this book. And one of the interesting experiences was I wrote it a long time ago. And then I kind of forgot about it. And one day there was a delivery at the door and I opened it up and I thought, what's being delivered? And I opened it up and it was copies of this book. And I called my friend and I said, you'll never guess what just happened. I wrote a book that I didn't even remember writing. And then I thought, wow, that's so great. And then I remembered everything, of course. And then I started reading it and I thought, who wrote this book? This is actually really helpful to me right here and right now in my life. And so I've been studying this book that I wrote a while back. I guess I had written it literally for me in my life. And this is what I wrote about. I write about, and I've talked about this in the past, but it's one of those evergreen topics that I think and maybe we just need to remember over and over again. Have you heard about the state of flow? It's a psychological idea described as being so immersed in an activity that time seems to stop. You become completely focused in on what you are doing. Sometimes it's called being in the zone, fully absorbed in what you're doing. When have you experienced that state of flow? What activities put you in that state? And then I go on and I say, being in a state of flow is wonderful. Choosing to do those activities that put you in a state of flow is a good idea. But being in a state of flow is only half of the story. As much as we would all love to be in a state of flow all the time, it just doesn't happen that way. Flow is one half of the whole. The other half of the equation is ebb. When people use the word ebb, it's usually to denote a negative state of being. They might describe their energy as ebbing, usually used as the opposite of flow. And people say they wish they hadn't experienced it. I don't see ebb in that way. I see ebb as the partner of flow. Ebb and flow, two halves of a whole. If there's a positive association attached to flow, then let's attach a positive association to ebb as well. After all, it's a state of being we will find ourselves in about half the time. The ocean doesn't just flow, it ebbs. That doesn't mean something's wrong with it. It just means that in one part of the world, the ocean is ebbing at that moment, and in another part of the world, the ocean is flowing. It's natural. Similarly, different parts of our life can be in a state of flow, while others can be in an ebb. It's natural. What you do during an ebb time, however, can move you closer or further away from your center. So there's a story about a teaching that I read about the time between when Jesus died on the cross and he was put into the tomb, and then 3 days later, according to the story in the New Testament, he rose. Most of us have heard that story. It's been told countless times in our lives over and over. The interesting part of that story is people focus on this and this, but not the 3 days in between. And one teacher that I read a long time ago was talking about those 3 days in between, saying those were the three pivotal days. Those were the days when the people who believed in those teachings, the teachings of Jesus, where they took to prayer and fasting and they did all of this stuff. It was because of what they did that this second action was able to happen. Because of what they did, the resurrection was actually able to occur, and they were able to see it and experience it. And that stuck with me quite a bit. It's that idea of what you do when the ebb happens, what you do in between the flows, is actually what determines the kind of flow you're going to have. It determines how you're going to see your whole life. It's a way of either seeing your life as part of a whole, or, oh, things aren't good now, but I know they're going to get better, and then you're just kind of a cork on the water. It's also a way to reframe everything that happens to us, the ebb and the flow of life. There's an old saying for people who are fishermen that when the storms come, the fishermen sit by the side of the ocean and repair their nets. And their nets are the things that catch the wind that moves them forward. So when the storms come, this saying, they make sure that their nets are as strong as possible, so that when the next wind comes, it will take them as far as they need to go. So reframing the events in your life from, instead of ebb is bad and flow is good, to I am always in a state of wholeness. Whether it feels like I'm in ebb or flow, it doesn't matter, because either one of them is the exact same experience of wholeness, just seen from the other side. And if I'm in flow, I can do this, and if I'm in ebb, I can do this. And either way, I am experiencing my true nature. The next idea that is in my head these days, right now, goes back to Rob's book. And this is a tough one for a lot of us. He talks about, he's talking about the nature of what God is in this book, in this part of the book. And he says this, he said, God is less like a noun and more like a verb. I am, capital letters, the I am. Being, capital B, being itself, capital I. That's what God is. That's what the I am is. It's being itself. The ultimate will always include all of it. He says there's a line in the Bible about who God is. And the line says this, God is above all, through all, and in all. Most of us have heard that line in our church, by the way. We've talked about that line. And he says, there's a line in the Bible of who God is, above all, through all, and in all. It's just one line, but it's massive. Above all, through all, and in all. He says, we have painful experiences or regrets or wounds that make us want to leave pieces of our history behind. This is a totally normal impulse, but doing this can leave us in pieces. Bits here, bits there, that you're not quite sure what to do with all of it. If someone mentions a place, you wince. Or if someone mentions a person, you tense up. You see a picture from a particular time and you get a pit in your stomach. We can easily end up at odds with our own story, or we can be at war with our own history, not knowing what to do with certain parts of our lives. But the I am, but the being itself invites us to own every square inch of our story. I'd left one life, he writes, only to learn that it was all with me still, above all of it and through all of it and in all of it. It's one of the hardest lessons, I think, for us to fully grasp and get on the spiritual path, that all of who we are is what God requires of us. Because if we try to leave, as Rob Bell says, leave pieces behind, what we're saying is that those parts are not part of the great I am, that there actually is a separation, so that I have to only be this in order to be worthy of the truth of who God is, and that everything else has to fall away before I am worthy of God's love, or my own love, or the love of life through me, however you want to put it. There's a Christian pop song that is called Who I Am Hates Who I've Been. And I listen to that and I think that's the opposite of what we teach in our teaching. That we don't hate who we've been. We embrace who we've been, but more importantly, we keep our eye focused on who we are becoming. Because by bringing all of it with us, it suddenly is not a burden, it becomes part of our awakening. Our movement towards wholeness requires that all of us, the parts that we label good and bad, come with us. All of you is spirit. All of you is spirit. And finally, the last thing I've been thinking about these days in my spiritual practice actually comes from this book, another just majestic book. If you liked books like The Alchemist, you'll love this book. This is a retelling, an inspirational retelling of the story in the Bible of Joseph from the Old Testament. Joseph and we know now through the musical, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Not Joseph and Mary, but the other Joseph who was left behind by his brothers and put in a pit and etc., and rose to become the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And it's a story about forgiveness. And he's in this little bit that I'm about to read for you. He talks about this other part that just really touches me right now, especially where we are in life at this moment, the world and myself and you all right now. And he's talking in this moment that the character Joseph is literally been thrown into a deep stony pit by his brothers, left to die. And he's sitting in there and he's recounting the things that he did that made them angry enough to put him in there. And he's feeling shame and anger and all of those things. And when he kind of feels through all of those feelings, he gets to one last thought, which is, there was nothing to do, there was nothing to pray but the words, "Thy will be done." He found himself sitting up now with his back against one of the pit's stone walls. Overhead, the stars looked in on their frigid brilliance. May your will be done. But there's something very odd about that prayer. Wasn't that prayer an act of arrogance? Who was he to be telling God what should or shouldn't happen? Of course God's will be done. How could it not? Everything that happened was God's will, because everything that happened is God. You would have to be dull indeed if you didn't realize this. Had his brothers acted against God's will? It was insane even to think it. So strange as it sounded, it was God who had thrown him into this pit. It was God who would let him live now or die. His brothers ultimately had nothing to do with it. They were just God's instruments. And he himself, think what he might, do what he might, could do nothing but God's will. Not I, but you, he thought. Not what I want, but what you within me wants. I'm not doing any of this. Whatever we think we are doing, we are all doing what is best, as best we can. We are all doing your will ultimately because we are all the work of your hands. This conclusion was not reasoned out. It came to him in a flash. All that he had been feeling began to dissipate as if the sun was beginning to shine out from behind an impenetrable fog. Could life really be this simple? Could what actually happened be something good? What he had been struggling against now was now letting go of him, or he of it. He had been trying to fight against the current of reality and now was riding it. He was now riding it, his mind riding on the onrushing river, letting it take him wherever it wished. The direction didn't matter. His life didn't matter. All that mattered was the letting go. That's the ultimate place. When we think about this chop wood, carry water, when we think about our spiritual life and our spiritual path in times of difficulty, in times of great change, in times where we are surrounded by every single thing around us telling us one thing or another, trying to frighten us all the time, is to remember that the great paradox of the spiritual path, one of the great paradoxes, is that when we let go, we're actually in our power and we have more power to affect the change that we wish to see in the world. But when we hold on and when we fight and when we get angry and when we stay in that place of, oh, it has to be this way and I can't believe this and where's God in all this? What's happening? And what's this news? And the news this minute is good and the news this minute is bad and things changing and this and that happening. When we breathe, when we let go and we say, wait a second, I remember whose I am. And by breathing and letting go, I can now find the power of the I am in me, which means I now can affect my life and life now in a positive way. Not only that, but the great I am has created me to do just that. That's the point. That's where we are, I think, right now, or where I am. And I assume some of you can relate to some of this. That whatever's happening in the news, whatever's happening with relatives and friends, whatever's happening with health and jobs and this and that we always have to remember we have to start with chopping wood, carrying water. Spiritually speaking, that means we always have to go right back to the basic, which is who you are, or rather whose you are. That you are divine manifestation. You are the I am living and breathing right now in physical form. And that whatever's happening in your life, you can embrace the changes and you can embrace it knowing that as you embrace it, you are literally moving yourself forward and not resisting anything. And anything that feels like an ebb in your life, you can reframe it knowing that this is the time. If it's an ebb time, it means that this is the time where you need to strengthen your life and your spiritual skills and your spiritual vision so that you can actually see things and not be spooked by your life or by the world outside of you. And that you can bring all of you is who God wants of you. You are not made by accident, and not only certain parts of you are the parts that the one mind, the God mind wants. All of you is that, because all of you is here. It's all one thing. And when we get to that place, then we can say, thy will be done. And the thy means the highest part of ourselves, that I am within us. Now, that is the will that can be done in our life. That maybe we can see things as a way of having been moved to grow and express ourselves in the greatest possible way there is. We're in for a lot of information, in this next month and beyond. So as you go through this, I just want to say, remember to find your way every day to chop wood, carry water, so that you are grounded, you are connected, and most importantly, you are in your power. That's why we're on the spiritual path. That's why we're here. And that is going to be our truth for the next month and beyond as we move forward. Let's bring this into treatment so that we can live it and experience it. Right now we breathe in the I am, and we breathe out the I am. In doing so, we recognize that there is nothing but the I am. This is the one mind that is our mind. It's just simply who we are, whose we are. We are that. And in that place, we now allow ourselves to remember that every day we can renew and rejuvenate and refresh ourselves in this truth and in this knowledge. And we can experience our joy in remembering whose we are. Whatever is happening in our lives, both personally and around us, we embrace the change. We don't resist on a spiritual level. We don't resist the change, but rather we embrace change so that we are not fighting against something that is happening. We reframe our life so that we know that we are never lacking. We are always in the spirit of spirit itself. We bring all of us to this, and we know that by letting go, paradoxically, we now are filled with the very power so that we can be instruments of positive change in the world. Paradoxically, not resisting change allows us to bring the change we wish to see. That is a spiritual idea that we, on a spiritual level, embrace and let be true for ourselves right here, right now. In our power, together we say, and so it is.